The police found Mark in the basement, bound to a support pillar with industrial zip ties, his face caked in a white adhesive foam, his arm bent at an angle that suggested a compound fracture. Elena sat upstairs in his leather chair, waiting, the leather ledger open on her lap. She had no tears left. She had stopped screaming hours ago. That morning had begun like any other. Elena knelt on the cream carpet by the oak nightstand. She pulled the bottom drawer open. It groaned slightly on its wooden runners. Her hand moved aside a stack of wired magazines from 2022, pushing through years of accumulated dust. She was looking for a phone charger. Mark's, probably, knowing how he hoarded cables like a paranoid squirrel. The drawer was deep and cluttered with the detritus of a man who never threw anything away. Behind the magazines, her fingertips brushed something else. Something smooth and plastic and cold. She paused. Her breathing changed. Some animal part of her brain recognized that this object did not belong with the magazines and cables and forgotten chargers. Her fingers closed around it. The device was matte black, no larger than a matchbox. A tiny green LED blinked once every 5 seconds, casting a faint jeweled light across her skin. She turned it over. The back had a magnetic strip and a small SIM card slot. Etched on the side in small letters, TRK 9992 Pro. Elena stood up quickly, her heart already accelerating. She knocked a glass of water on the nightstand. It tipped lazily, and she watched the water spread across the framed photo of her and Mark at the beach. Their honeymoon 3 years ago. The water soaked into the paper, distorting Mark's face, blurring his smile into something grotesque. She heard the front door unlock downstairs. Mark's footsteps. The heavy, confident tread of a man who owned everything he touched, including the space around him. Elena shoved the device into her jeans pocket. Her hand was shaking. She stood there for a moment, listening to him move through the house below, listening to the ordinary sounds of his arrival. His keys jingling onto the hall table, his jacket being hung, the opening of the refrigerator. She forced her breathing to slow. An hour later, they stood in the kitchen. Mark was at the island, chopping red bell peppers with a professional chef's knife, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He was still in his charcoal suit trousers and white button-down shirt. The knife came down in perfect rhythmic strokes, each pepper strip identical to the last. "Rough day at the office, El?" he asked, not looking up. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Elena gripped the dish towel tighter. She watched a second phone, identical to Mark's official one, which sat charging on the other side of the kitchen. Rest face down next to the stove. The blue flame beneath the pot threw dancing shadows across its glass back. The phone vibrated, a single mechanical buzz against the stone countertop. Mark's hand paused for exactly 1 second. The knife stopped mid-chop. She saw his knuckles whiten on the handle. Then he resumed chopping as if nothing had happened. Elena reached for the phone. Mark dropped the knife. The steel clanged against the porcelain tile with a shocking brightness. His hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, not roughly at first, but then the pressure increased, his fingers digging into the delicate inside of her arm until she felt the small bones shifting against each other. "Don't touch that," he said. His voice had changed. All the warmth had drained out of it, replaced by something thin and sharp. "It's a work thing, highly confidential." She pulled her arm back. Mark let go immediately, and she watched the color drain from his face, watched him slide into a mask of regret so perfectly formed that she almost believed it was real. But the damage was done. 4 finger marks and a thumbprint already blooming red on her pale skin. "I'm sorry," he said. There's sensitive material on there." She didn't respond. She walked to the window and looked out at the driveway, at the darkening sky. Behind her, Mark resumed chopping peppers. At 11 o'clock that night, Elena sat in her silver SUV with the ignition on. The headlights pierced the thick fog that had rolled in across the neighborhood, reducing the street to a dreamlike blur. She wanted to drive. She wanted to leave this house and drive until she couldn't anymore. Until the miles between her and Mark added up to something that felt like safety. She shifted into reverse. A dark gray sedan swerved into her path and stopped, blocking the tail of her car with surgical precision. The parking job was perfect. She couldn't reverse, couldn't pull forward. She was caged. A man in a navy hoodie emerged from the driver's side. He ran to her window and began pounding on the glass with a heavy flashlight. The sound was tremendous. Metal against glass, violent and rhythmic. She saw the spiderweb patterns beginning to form in the window, fractures radiating from each impact point. Elena threw the door open with all her strength. It hit him in the chest, and he stumbled back, gasping. She lunged out after him, reaching for the flashlight, and they grappled in the wet grass at the edge of the driveway. The earth was soft from earlier rain. Mud squeezed up between her toes. She was still in her pajamas, she realized. His hands were too strong. He pushed her down onto her back, and the wind knocked out of her. She kicked blindly, and her heel connected with something soft. He cried out, his grip loosening. She kicked again and rolled away from him, her nails raking across his cheek as she scrambled backward. She felt the resistance of skin, then the warm flow of blood. He shoved her hard to the ground and sprinted back to his sedan. The engine roared to life. He threw the car into reverse, tires spinning in the mud, and accelerated backward down the street into the fog. Elena lay in the mud, breathing hard, her white pajama bottoms stained dark. Above her, on the porch, Mark stood silhouetted against the yellow porch light. He wasn't running to help. He wasn't even moving. His arms were crossed. He was simply standing there, watching the sedan disappear into the fog, watching her lying in the mud, his expression completely neutral. She pushed herself up on shaking arms. Inside the house, Mark walked methodically around the living room, turning the deadbolts on the front and back doors. The brass keys jingled in his hand as he pocketed them. Each lock clicked home with a definitive finality. Elena sat on the edge of the velvet sofa, her hands tucked between her knees to hide the mud and the shaking. She watched him settle into the armchair opposite her, leaning forward as if they were about to have a serious conversation about something that mattered. He pulled a digital recorder from his pocket and set it on the coffee table between them. His thumb pressed the record button. A small red light glowed to life. Receipt appeared on the LCD screen. "Tell me everything you took from my drawer, Elena," he said, his voice soft and measured. "For your own safety." She didn't answer. She couldn't answer. The words had calcified in her throat. Mark stood up and walked to the window. He gripped the heavy curtains and pulled them shut, sealing the room from the outside world. The street lamp light disappeared. The room contracted into a smaller, darker space. He leaned over her, his hands pressed against the sofa back on either side of her head, caging her in with his body. He smelled of expensive cologne and something metallic. Copper, she thought. The smell of blood. Her blood, probably, from where he'd held her wrist. His face was inches from hers. His eyes didn't blink. Elena suddenly grabbed a heavy crystal vase from the side table and hurled it at the glass-fronted china cabinet. It exploded in a tremendous shower of shards, thousands of fragments glinting like diamonds as they hit the floor. The sound was enormous in the trapped space of the living room. Mark flinched. That was all the time she needed. She lunged for his trouser pocket. Her fingers hooked the key ring and ripped it out, tearing the fabric with a terrible sound of ripping cloth. The silver keys swung in her hand. She could feel their weight, their solidity, their promise. Mark grabbed her from behind, pulling her down onto the hardwood floor. Her ribs hit the edge of the coffee table. She kicked back blindly and felt her heel connect with something soft. His throat, she thought. He gagged, his grip loosening for just a second. Elena pushed herself up and ran. Her bare feet slapped against the hardwood floor of the hallway. Behind her, she could hear Mark recovering, the wet sound of his cough, his feet pounding after her. She sprinted for the back door, the keys clutched so tightly they dented her skin. Mark hurled a wooden chair into her path. It caught her across the shoulder, spinning her toward the door frame, and she crashed into the wall hard enough to knock the wind from her lungs. She could feel him right behind her, could hear his breathing, could smell that copper scent again. She jammed the key into the lock. The deadbolt turned. The sliding glass door opened, and she threw herself through it into the rain-soaked night. The backyard was dark, punctuated only by the distant glow of the neighbor's porch light and the pale wash of the moon through the clouds. Elena ran for the line of pine trees at the edge of their property, her feet splashing through mud and pooled rainwater, her pajamas clinging to her legs. A man stepped out from behind a large oak tree. Elena stopped cold. In the darkness, it took her a moment to recognize him. Detective Miller, the man she had called 2 days ago when the strange phone appeared on Mark's nightstand. The man who had listened to her suspicions with the kind eyes of a believer. "Miller," she cried out, relief flooding through her. "Thank God. He's crazy. He's tracking me." Miller held up a hand. His badge glinted in the dark. Behind Elena, Mark walked out onto the porch, and she felt the universe tilt on its axis. Miller reached into his coat and pulled out a manila envelope. He handed it to Mark over Elena's head, his movements efficient and practiced. Mark took it with a small nod, as if they were business partners exchanging a quarterly report. "She found the TRK 990, Mark," Miller said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You were getting sloppy." Elena looked down at the envelope in Mark's hands. The words "Subject Data Logs" were stamped on it in red ink, and below that, in handwriting she didn't recognize. "Elena Vane, Comprehensive Report." The rain fell harder. The ink began to run. Mark took her arm, gently this time, which was infinitely worse. He led her back toward the house. Miller turned and disappeared into the woods as if he had never existed at all. The glass door slid shut behind them with a sound like a prison lock. In the basement, everything changed. Mark opened the heavy wooden door, and Elena saw for the first time what he had been building in the darkness below their house. Every wall was covered in thick gray foam acoustic panels. The space was completely soundproofed, a tomb of silence. He forced her onto a heavy wooden chair in the center of the room. She tried to stand, tried to run, but he was too fast. He wrapped industrial-strength zip ties around her ankles, securing them to the chair legs with a practiced efficiency that suggested he had done this before. The white plastic cut into her skin. Mark set up a laptop on a folding table. When he opened it, Elena saw a grid of 12 camera feeds, all from inside their house, the living room, the kitchen, the master bedroom, the hallway, each feed labeled in white text. One feed was labeled basement, and in it she could see herself, bound to the chair, and Mark standing beside her. Her eyes moved to the master bedroom feed. Under the bed, barely visible, she could make out the corner of a black suitcase. Not hers, not the luggage they had bought together. "We're leaving tomorrow," Mark said, his voice taking on a strange, dreamy quality. "For a place where no one can feed your paranoia." He turned off the main light, leaving only the blue glow of the laptop. The room collapsed into shadow and pale electric blue. He left, and the heavy steel-reinforced door clicked into place with a vacuum seal. She heard the lock engage with a definitive thunk. Elena was alone in the blue dark. She rocked the chair violently, throwing her entire weight against it. The wood groaned. On the third attempt, the back leg cracked against the concrete floor with a sharp, final sound. Splinters shot across the floor. She used a shard of wood to saw through the zip ties. Her wrists were bleeding by the time the plastic snapped, but she was free. She pushed herself up, staggering, her legs unsteady from being bound. The door lock began to hum. Mark entered, and she saw the needle in his hand. The syringe was enormous, the kind you might use on a horse. She grabbed the laptop from the table and swung it like a club. The screen shattered against his head. He staggered, and she swung again, her arms strengthened by pure panic and adrenaline. Mark grabbed her hair and slammed her head into the acoustic foam. The padding was thick enough to absorb most of the impact, but the force drove her to her knees. He was trying to pin her down, his good arm wrapping around her neck, the syringe coming up toward her throat. Elena reached for the syringe. She managed to grip his wrist, and they locked in a struggle, the needle hovering between them. The point was so close, she could feel the whisper of it near her jugular. His veins bulged in his forehead. His teeth were bared. Elena brought her knee up hard. Mark howled and released her, doubling over. She grabbed the folder that had fallen from the couch during their fight, the one Miller had given Mark. She ripped it open, and papers scattered across the concrete floor. She froze. The first photograph was of her. But it wasn't a recent photo. It was from her childhood, maybe 10 years old, taken at a school event. How had Mark gotten this? How did he have a photo from before they met? She picked up another photo, Mark standing next to a man in a dark suit. The man had her father's face. The photo was dated 10 years ago, 3 years before she and Mark had met. Her father was dead. She had buried him. Elena found the psychiatric report. The name on the patient file was not hers. It was Mark's. The diagnosis, in clinical language, described something that had no name in her vocabulary, a pattern of thinking that suggested obsession, control, a kind of elaborate fantasy made manifest in the real world. The report was dated 15 years ago, but handwritten notes in the margins suggested ongoing documentation since then. "You were the perfect subject, Elle," Mark said. His voice came from behind her, and she realized he had gotten up from the floor. His arm was hanging useless at his side, clearly broken, but he was smiling. "You always suspected. You just didn't know why." He had his second syringe in his other hand. Elena grabbed the pipe wrench from the pegboard and swung with everything she had left. The metal connected with Mark's arm, and she felt the bone break, a sickening snap that seemed to echo in the acoustic foam. He screamed, and his good arm hung useless. He tackled her with his shoulder. She crashed against the workbench, and her hand found the industrial adhesive. She sprayed it directly into his face, into his eyes. He shrieked and stumbled backward, clawing at his face as the white foam hardened on his skin. While he was blinded, Elena grabbed the zip ties from the floor. Her hands were shaking, but they moved with a terrible precision. She bound his wrists behind his back around the heavy metal support pillar that held up the house. She wrapped the ties multiple times, making sure they wouldn't slip. She was methodical. She was thorough. Mark stopped struggling. He stood there, bound to the pillar, his face covered in white foam, his eyes hidden beneath layers of hardened adhesive, both his arms broken and useless. The blue light of the broken laptop reflected off the foam like a twisted mask. "You'll never be able to trust anyone again, Elle," he said. his voice a low rasp. "I've seen to that. I'm inside your head now." Elena picked up the landline phone from the kitchen wall upstairs and dialed 911. Her voice was level as she reported what had happened. She didn't embellish. She didn't scream. She stated the facts with the detachment of someone reporting on a weather pattern or traffic condition. Then she went to Mark's study and used the pipe wrench to smash the lock on his desk. Inside, she found a bank statement showing a balance of $4.2 million in an offshore account. She found a leather ledger with names and amounts. Her boss, $5,000 Amico, reporting. Her sister Sarah, $2,000 mo, reporting. Her best friend Jennifer, $3,500 mo, reporting. Her therapist, $10,000 mo, full access. Down the list it went, every person in her life, each one tagged with a function and a price. She was sitting in Mark's leather chair when the police arrived. The sirens cut through the morning with their terrible wailing. Blue and red light flashed across the study walls, casting moving shadows through the blind slats. An officer found her there. The ledger open on her lap, her hands bandaged, her eyes empty. The interview room at the police station was small and metal-walled and fluorescent-lit. Elena sat at a metal table with a styrofoam cup of coffee that she didn't drink. Detective Ross sat across from her, a tired woman in her 50s with kind eyes that didn't quite match her professional demeanor. Ross slid an evidence bag across the table toward Elena. Inside was the matte black device. The green LED was now a steady red. "This device," Ross said, "wasn't a tracker for you." Elena didn't speak. She had stopped speaking hours ago. She picked up the styrofoam cup and took a sip of the coffee. It was cold. She set it back down and waited. Behind the mirror, the man in the suit made a note on his tablet and stood up. He left the observation room, and the video feed continued to run, recording everything. Elena's bandaged wrists resting on the metal table, her face neither angry nor sad nor afraid, but simply present. Here, alive, trapped in this moment as completely as Mark was trapped in the basement. The clock on the wall ticked.